Okay, Richard. I'm Kathy Bole, and
Hi, Kathy. How are you?
hi. And I also have with us Fran Springfield from Disability Labor, one of our
Hi,
co-chairs.
Fran.
I'm
Hi, Richard.
co-vice chair. And first of all, thank you for coming to speak to us as a kind of a hustings.
My
It
pleasure.
was really good of you to do that for us.
And I've learned something as well because, believe it or not, I must confess I've never used Zoom before, and so
Oh,
it's lifelong learning for me.
yeah. Well, it was for me too. It was really frightening. But now we use it in disability labor. We use it all the time. Our meetings once a month are all held during Zoom. So people can so we can keep the costs down because
Yes,
we don't need the reasonable as much as if we're meeting virtually, we don't need as many reasonable adjustments.
of
So,
course.
and until we're fully funded, and part of the Labor Party, we have to penny pinch. But anyway, so basically we did a poll or asked people to give us a selection of questions to ask you. We have a selection of 10.
Great.
And sometimes something in what you say we'll ask a supplementary. I'm going to do the first 5 and get to see what.
Do we want to give Richard 5 minutes to do his pitch?
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, this is a professional outfit. Can't you tell?
I'm enjoying getting to nosy around your houses, by the way. So,
Yeah.
Usually Kathy has lots of owls around her home. She
all right,
looks
wonderful.
after owls.
I actually have 2 captive bred owls that are my pets.
Wow.
And a disabled crow. I do rehab for wild birds of prey as
Splendid.
well.
Now the owl is the symbol or the mascot of the city of Leeds. So
Yeah, see?
I should learn more about owls as well.
Yeah, well, I'll have to bring one. Some meeting when I have it, I will make sure that I have one of my owls present.
Fantastic.
Okay, and if you saw the picture, I have a really big picture on the wall. I don't know. No, it's not visible.
Is that
Yes,
Lemmy?
it is.
Wow.
It was painted by my brother.
Fantastic.
An oil painting.
So is it you or him that's the fan of Motorhead or both?
Both.
Fantastic. I thought,
yes.
I know we've got to get onto these questions in a minute, but I thought that even their later albums were really good. Because lots of people say that it's only the first 3 albums around Ace of Spades that are good. But I thought in the last 10 years, and I see them every year on the November tour, and I think that actually the later albums are amazing as well, with Mickey D on the drums, who's obviously a far better drummer than Filthy Phil, the Animal Taylor, who was from Leeds as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I
no disrespect to him, but yeah.
No, and I wouldn't, I think they're all crazy as hell, and it's sad. He painted that just after Lemmy passed, so when there was a memorial, he sent them a print of that painting, and they were really excited. I think they auctioned it off or something, but yeah. So
it captures his attitude. It's brilliant. It's really good.
Yeah, I just was absolutely amazed. Thinking about he used to paint old guys with their motorcycles because he's really into the motorcycle scene over there with different he's accepted by many of the motorcycle clubs. So
fantastic.
Yeah. Anyway, that's probably more than you needed to know about me. But but anytime we meet, we'll have to have a Motorhead chat.
That'd be great.
A metal chat.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Well, now the boring stuff. Many disabled members
Hang on,
have been.
Kathy, you still need Richard to do
Oh,
it.
yeah, sorry.
That's
Go
all right.
ahead, Richard.
That's all right. Richard,
Give us 5 minutes.
I'll do
Okay.
this bit. So, Richard, if you want to just give us 5 minutes on why you believe our members should support you for deputy leader, and what you would do to make the Labour Party more inclusive of disabled members.
Okay, thanks very much. I think everyone have seen the news yesterday about Errol Graham, and he died after the DWP had stopped his benefits. And that's another reminder, I think, to all of the public, and should be to all politicians as well, of how dreadfully disabled people are treated in this country. And of course, the disproportionately paid the price for Conservative austerity. It's often quoted what the United Nations Special Rapporteur said about the way disabled people are treated in this country, and that should be a source of shame for the governments. But as a society, we need to act. As Shadow Secretary of State for Justice, I've supported the campaigns of disabled people in any way that I can. For example, my pledge on legal aid in relation to social security, making sure there's legal aid for people to have assistance in relation to social security claims and appeals, and also in relation to our programme for rolling out law centres across the country, including specific law centres for different communities and different sections. For example, law centres specialising in assisting disabled people, not only with social security cases, but with housing cases and other things as well. So I'm devastated that we didn't win that general election. If we had, we'd have been able to not just talk about those policies and not just propose them, actually put them into practice in power. A key thing I want to say as well is we've made a lot of gains as a party in the last few years with Jeremy Corbyn as leader. Disabled people have led some of the fiercest resistance to Conservative cuts. Some people didn't like it, but I thought it was fantastic when, for example, DPAC members occupied central lobby in Parliament. It's that kind of activity that needs to be supported by a campaigning Labour Party to support disabled people in their campaigns for dignity, in their campaigns for the treatment that they deserve. Labour historically hasn't always stood firm against those attacks. I remember, for example, a member of Parliament saying, these are her words, Labour isn't the party for people on benefits. And I think we need to make sure, that was the past, we need to make sure we don't return to those days. So I'm standing as deputy leader who will defend those gains that have been made. But I think we need to do a lot more on disabilities, because I do understand the frustrations disabled people feel at the slow pace of change. Into universal credit, for example, we got there in the end, but we dragged our feet, and people were rightly upset about that. On schools and education, we should have been clearer, in my opinion, that institutionalisation and having a model where disabled children are in separate schools isn't the way forward, because the disabled people I listen to in my constituency and elsewhere certainly believe that disabled people should be in the same schools, but they should have special provision where required in those schools. They're not part of a different community, they're part of a whole community. I think hate crime as well, of course, we need to ensure that hate crime is recognised in relation to disabled people. In my campaign, I'm proud to be endorsed by people who have also backed the fight being led by disabled people. Laura Pidcock is the chair of my campaign. John McDonnell is backing my campaign, and Unite the Union is backing my campaign. Of course, I've spoken with at Labour Assembly Against Austerity meetings with Unite's disabled section representative, Sean McGovern, who speaks so inspiringly with such great passion about the battles that still need to be won working with disabled people. But we need to go further than warm words. Anybody can say in these hustings what people want to hear. What we need to do is ensure that structural changes are made, and I think the Deputy Leader has a special responsibility for this, to ensure that you as disabled people are empowered and your organisation is empowered in relation to policy. So I think that Disability Labour needs to be more central to our party. That means extra central support from the party. For example, in this deputy leadership and leadership election process. CLPs around the country are nominating. My understanding is that disabled members who can't attend can't put in a proxy vote for their CLP's nomination, nor can they put in a postal vote or an email vote for their nomination. Therefore, disabled people who can't attend nomination meetings have no power to decide who their CLP tries to put on the ballot paper, and that's wrong. Another thing I would like to change, Deputy Leader, is have a policy-making conference where disabled people have the power to make policy that relates to disabled people. Last year's Women's Conference was a step forward. So if Disability Labour wants it, because ultimately it's up to you, I think that Disability Labour should be empowered to have their own policy-making special day conference, for example, ahead of Labour Party conference. So you, the experts on what it's like to live as a disabled person in this country, can decide what policies you wish to push and what policies are then adopted. I also think that whatever conference decides should be in the manifesto. It shouldn't be just advisory. I also think that Disability Labour and disabled people should have an elected place on the National Executive Committee. I think that's very important as well. So I'd like to commit with working, if I'm elected as Deputy Leader, commit to working with you to get the structures you want. Those are just some of my ideas from listening to people, but ultimately I'm not the expert on this, you are, and that's the point. You need to be empowered to have the structures in place where you get to decide what the policy is. I've mentioned the question of accessibility, using technology like today to ensure that disabled members have a say and can access. Also, I'm the only deputy leadership candidate to support open selection so that trade unions and party members can decide in a fully democratic way who their parliamentary candidate is at each general election. I think that feeds into you as well, because of course disabled Labour members have opinions on which candidates have supported their policy demands and which candidates haven't. And it's for you to hold people to account on those issues and for you to pass your judgment accordingly. And open selection will allow you to do that. And the last point I want to make is never again do I want to hear anecdotes of people saying we can't afford to send so-and-so to party conference as our CLP delegate because it'll cost the CLP too much money because they're disabled. You hear of people having fundraisers to send disabled people to conference. That isn't right. What the Labour Party needs is some kind of accessibility fund where they will take care of the additional finances required to ensure that disabled people can travel to and be accommodated at party conference. I think that's important as well. So it shouldn't be something which is in the mind of a disabled member or their colleagues in the CLP as to be a question as to whether or not they can go to conference, whether or not it'll cost the CLP more to go to conference, because even in a subconscious way that affects people. So I think some kind of accessibility fund held by the Labour Party centrally is important as well to ensure that disabled people play a full and active role in the life and democratic processes in our party.
Thank you, Richard. That's a great start. Before I start with question one, something that you said really sparked something in the back of my mind that I'd like to ask. If you become deputy leader, will you commit to an actual change to allow people who want to belong to the Labour Party but who can't afford it? Some people find things where they can't do both. They can't join one thing and then join something else. And I wondered if you would commit to going to bat for our members who were stuck in that kind of situation. Representing for us to make sure that every disabled person gets a chance to participate at any level in the party.
That's very important. That's something I would commit to, because people have got to understand, non-disabled people have got to understand what the concept of disabled means. It's society that disables disabled people. And of course, as part of that, there's extra hurdles, both literal and metaphorical as well, and extra financial hurdles. Other organisations that disable people on disproportionately low incomes need to spend their money on. So we've got to ensure that disabled people in that way aren't discriminated against and prevented from joining the Labour Party because they haven't got the money left at the end of the day to join. So that is something we need to sort out. We've got to look at ourselves in the mirror and say that we have this grand vision, which is quite correct, for an empowered society, a grand vision for a society where disabled people can have a full and active role in that society. But we've got to put our own house in order as well. So we've got to be better than society in relation to this, in my view.
Thank you. I better get on to the real questions.
Okay.
That was just one that popped up. It is an important fact, though. Many disabled members have not been able to participate in their hustings, and you've already talked about this. So I think I'm going to skip the question because you talked about having the ability to represent. So having postal votes to be able to participate in elections such as the leadership elections, we're kind of in a position where if we can't get to a meeting where they're having hustings, we're not allowed to vote. And would you support the postal votes to?
Yes, I mean, there's all sorts of different ways, postal votes, proxy votes, email votes, and I think it's ridiculous that disabled Labour members who can't attend nomination meetings, basically in terms of their own CLP's nomination as to who they think should be on the ballot paper, have literally no voice in this matter. They don't have a vote, so their opinion therefore at the moment doesn't count, and that's just wrong. And that, I mean, it's got to change. It can change. It's not difficult to change it, is it really? In my opinion.
In mine either. Number two, when in government, will you stop the frequent and traumatizing face-to-face interviews for ESA and PIP?
That's something that we've got to stop. And I was talking with some campaigners actually in Sheffield on Saturday night about this. I think, for example, in my constituency surgeries, one of the things that strikes me most is when people talk about those degrading interviews. And I think it's just something that needs to stop. And I'm pleased that we arrived at the position we did, for example, in relation to universal credit in the end. But I do understand the frustrations that disabled members have had that we didn't arrive at a better position more quickly on these issues. So advances were made in relation to Labour policy, disabled people and social security, but not quickly enough. And what do I think a way to remedy this is? By empowering disabled members to make policy in relation to the situation faced by disabled people.
Thank you, Richard. Question 3. Would you hold to account ministers who have overseen the deaths of thousands of people because of their inhumane and degrading Tory welfare cuts and policies?
Well, we have to hold them to account in opposition, but we also have to hold them to account in government. And we have to fully look into exactly how they arrived at these grotesque, inhumane positions and why they stuck with them. So yes, they need to be held to account, because the human effect of what they did is absolutely dreadful. And basically, it's piling misery upon people who've already been disabled by society, whose lives are already too tough and unnecessarily tough as it is. So they need to pay a political price. They need to be politically and personally accountable for what they've done, because politics is a situation where all too often privileged people are making decisions which rule and govern the quality of life of millions of people across this country. And they've got to understand that with that power comes responsibility, and with that power comes accountability as well.
Terrific, thank you. Number 4, are you aware of how much money disabled people need per month to have an equal standard of living to those who are not disabled. What would you do to fix this huge divide?
Well, I haven't got the exact figure to hand, but obviously I understand the additional cost that is required to redress the balance, because of course when people face discrimination in society, some kind of positive action is required to get over that discrimination or mitigate it, and that means extra money being spent. What's the actual specific figure financially?
It's £583 per month.
Yeah, so we need to
in
publicize
addition.
it. Yes, we need to publicise that as widely as possible, because I think for non-disabled people, it helps them to understand the plight of disabled people. And we need to raise living standards. And this is why I'm glad that the party has moved away under Jeremy, and with John McDonnell as Shadow Chancellor, moved away from this kind of awful rhetoric about people on social security. I don't like it when I hear politicians pontificating about so-called handouts, or talking about benefits, or so-called scroungers, or trying to almost think that the only people they're interested in are who people who are able to work at that point or have a job at that time. So we've got to make sure we don't retreat from those positions, but we've also got to go further. When I heard the debate about universal income, universal basic income, for example, and that's something that needs considering, because that's something that perhaps could deal with the problem that you're referring to as well. That's just one of many options.
Okay, thank you. My last question to you, and then Fran will ask the others. Many disabled candidates fail to get onto both long lists and short lists for council and parliamentary seats. What will you do to ensure disabled candidates would be included on every long list and short list?
I do think that positive action is required in relation to that. I was looking at some figures of the day. Out of 650 odd members of parliament, I think only 5 or so are disabled, and that's absolutely, ridiculous and grotesque when you think of the millions of people in our country who are living with being disabled people. So that needs to change. So I do think that positive action should be explored. It worked in relation to addressing the underrepresentation of women on the benches of the Parliamentary Labour Party. I think it can work in relation to disabled people as well. And people have got to understand, and this is where the voice of disability labour is so important, non-disabled people need to understand this is about levelling the playing field. Because of course some people might sort of rubbish about, oh, this is an extra advantage with this candidate or that candidate. It's not. It's about trying to level the playing field and redress an awful underrepresentation and redress an imbalance.
Thank you. Okay, Fran, I turn over to you. Thanks, Richard, very much for
My pleasure.
Standing by while I pontificate. Anyway, go ahead, Fran.
Richard, my first question is a follow-on, in fact, from talking about candidate lists. Standing for office, be it for local council or parliamentary, can be prohibitively expensive for disabled people. Would you champion some form of bursary scheme which would cover all reasonable adjustments for disabled candidates, or what would you suggest that the party should do instead?
I think that's a great idea. I mentioned earlier the idea of accessibility funds to ensure that disabled Labour members get to go to conference and play a full life in the role of the party. In relation to being candidates as well, and campaigning to be selected as a candidate, whether it's for local elections or national elections or any other, I think that's important too. And the party should have a central fund for these reasonable adjustments. Before I was a Member of Parliament, I was a trade union lawyer, and one of the types of cases I specialise in the employment tribunals was Disability Discrimination Act claims. First of all, Disability Discrimination Act claims, then of course later it became the Equality Act in 2010, and specifically around a lot of claims in relation to reasonable adjustments where employers had failed to make reasonable adjustments. So I think that the Labour Party can be proud of our role in relation to the Equality Act. Obviously it needs to be taken further, but I think we need to have as part of an accessibility fund or whatever we wish to call it centrally, we need to have a pot of money that ensures that reasonable adjustments are made for disabled people running for elected office or running to become candidates for elected office in the Labour Party. And people should understand, disabled people should understand that that's their right. They shouldn't have to make the case for it. It should be just there, so they shouldn't have to worry about it, because going for elected office is worrying enough as it is without having additional worries in terms of the reasonable adjustments required as a disabled person.
Okay, just a quick add-on for that. I'm not sure if you're aware, but if you happen to be on Universal Credit or indeed on ESA and want to stand as a councillor, the allowance you get as a councillor is counted as earned income, so it gets knocked off your benefit.
That's bad, isn't it?
What you would do about that particular issue?
Well, that needs to change, and so this feeds back in a way to what I was saying about empowering disabled people who are members of the Labour Party to make policy. There are plenty of things which won't necessarily occur to non-disabled Labour members or Labour MPs, unless, of course, you tell us about them. But rather than you just telling us about them, I think you should have a role in making that policy, deciding that policy. And that's something that needs ironing out as well. The point you just made about councillors and universal credit being reduced as a result of it being counted as income. I mean, that's just not on. Yet again, that's another disincentive for people who the whole of society, in the way it's structured, disincentivizes from being involved fully in life in any event. It's another disincentive for people from running for elected office, and we need to remove those disincentives. We need to remove those barriers.
Thank you. I don't know if you've seen the stuff that disabled people were campaigning around in the general election, asking with ROFA, which is Reclaim Our Futures Alliance, for the introduction of a national independent living service.
Yes.
I wondered whether that was something you supported, and whether you also support the enshrining of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities into UK law.
I think that's an important point, because when I've been listening to people, disabled people, talking about how they want disabled people to be treated in our society, something they mention in relation to our manifesto as well is, obviously, social care is very important. However, disabled people want to be able to live a fully independent life. It's not just about somebody coming around to the house to ensure that people are showered and get the food to eat that they need and help them with preparing food. They want to be empowered to live independently and live their own lives. So I think we need to move beyond the social care model to a more independent living model. And I think as well the UN definition in the Charter helps us understand that as well. So incorporation of that in relation to the parties' constitution maybe and into law is very important in my view. I know there are different views on this, but I do think that people need to understand that disabled people want to be empowered to live a full life, and the independent living is very important. It's not just about people visiting 3 times a day to help out, in my opinion. I mean, what's your view?
I mean, as Kathy and I are both in receipt of social care and have both gone through all the difficulties that involves. I mean, I actually acted as Kathy's advocate to enable her to get social care, because she originally wasn't given any sense of allowance whatsoever. And she's actually been supporting me to do the same in the shamefully the Labour borough in which I live, because I haven't got the care package at the moment that I need to have. So having an independent living service where that's, you know, done nationally and not based on just local government targets, I think is incredibly important.
I think
that's right.
Can I just add to that as well, is the fact that within the being able to live independently, it's making social care in a way so that people who are in receipt of the benefits can fit the social care around the things that they want to do, and not envisioning people who are disabled as not doing anything. And we need to be grateful for getting people to come in for the short visits that they get. So you can't choose how and when somebody comes in to deliver care.
Exactly, that's an important point. And a much more basic point I was going to make as well, just in relation to social care itself, even as it exists, is with all this outsourcing and privatisation, you're getting situations, people have been telling me in my own constituency, whereby it's different people coming around on different days. And I think it's very important that people develop a relationship where they're comfortable with the person that comes around to see them. Because obviously people do require intimate help in many cases. And the idea of it being almost a stranger coming around some weeks because the outsourced company. I mean, I know of people who need assistance in having showers, for example, that refuse to have a shower, and I understand it, because the person coming round is a different one from the one they used to, just been sent by the organisation, and therefore they refuse to have a shower because they don't want to be seen with no clothes on by this person. And that's the kind of thing people need to understand, that when it comes to outsourcing and privatisation and people treating people almost as customers rather than citizens, that this is the kind of degrading situation that occurs, then leads people not having a shower because they don't feel comfortable to have it.
Thank you. Yeah, I absolutely agree with your last point. I've been in that place. I've got 3 more questions to do. The first one is, this is really looking about internal party stuff. How would you engage with disabled members so that you can understand the injustices being experienced by us and ensure our voices are heard, and ensure that all Labour Party policies are equality impact assessed?
Well, I think that all Labour Party policies should be impact equality assessed. And in relation to ensuring that disabled members' voices are heard, I think they should make policy on matters which relate to disabled people. So if it's something that disabled Labour members want, because ultimately it's up to you and up to them, if it's something that they want, I think they should have their own policy-making conference. You could have it for a day, for example, in the same way that the Women's Conference has worked, because it'd be ludicrous for me, as somebody who's not disabled, to come on here saying that I've got all the answers. How on earth would I have all the answers when I don't live that experience day in, day out? There's only so much that research and reading and listening can give. What we need to do is say, just as the people who should make policy in relation to women's issues should be women, and that's why it's great that there's the women's policy-making, the Women's Conference with policy-making powers. So in relation to disabled people, it should be the same if that's what disabled Labour members want. And if I'm elected as deputy leader, if that's what disabled Labour members want, I will push, I will drive for that. And I think that the leader and deputy leader, as well as the relevant shadow cabinet ministers, should attend such the special disabled members conference each time as well.
Just coming back to you on the issue of that conference, do you accept the fact that actually for disabled people to attend, many of us will need carers or supporters to be able to go with us, and that there needs to be a fair and equitable system for making sure that expenses are paid and are covered for the whole of that conference, because that's a huge issue for many of us getting to conferences and indeed regional events.
Exactly. That's why I think that the Labour Party should have an accessibility fund, or it could be given some other name, but that would be the concept of it, whereby there's a pot of money nationally reserved there to ensure that reasonable adjustments are made, ensure that the extra finance that often disabled people have to find in order to get to conferences or be accommodated at conferences, it shouldn't be their problem. It shouldn't be something they have to worry about. That worry and that burden should be taken away. We're a party with more than 500,000 members. We're a party with a lot of money. This shouldn't be beyond our wit to sort this out.
Thank you. The last 2 questions I've got really relate to the complaint system within Labour. many disabled people, particularly those with neurodiverse conditions, are adversely affected by and impacted within the current dysfunctional party complaint system. That applies to those who both make complaints and have complaints made against them. Would you agree to work with disabled members in disability labour to ensure people can be properly supported by advocates throughout the whole of that system?
I think that's crucial. We as a party don't accept any idea and wouldn't accept any idea that disabled people wouldn't be allowed advocates when they're engaging in social security appeals, for example, or in housing issues. So therefore, why should we accept that in our own party? Either when the disabled person is the person making the complaint, or the disabled person is the person who is the subject of a complaint. So I think advocacy is very important, especially when some disabled members have disabilities which aren't necessarily visible. I know it sounds ridiculous that I'm even having to say that, but of course some people don't understand or know that. And you get some situations where people are complaining about behaviour which actually is the result not of any bad behaviour, but a result of a disability that's non-visible. And therefore, I think in that situation in particular, but in all situations, advocates are important.
Thank you. Just continuing on about, and this is our last question, about the complaint system. There seems at the moment to many of us that complaints go into the system and it's like going into a big black hole. We get no feedback. Even if you've been complained about, people don't get feedback, so they don't understand what's going on in the system. Would you commit to some sort of immediate review to deal with all the outstanding issues to do with the complaint system?
I think that makes sense. I'd like to hear more about that from disability labour. So you're saying there's a widespread situation where disabled members are putting complaints in about various either treatments, lack of reasonable adjustments, or behaviour towards them, and there's no feedback at all. Because one of the most important bits of feedback, I think, is what's being done as a result of a complaint, because a complaint should lead to a change in practice. And I knew this when I was an employment tribunal lawyer, specialising in, amongst other things, Equality Act claims representing people, representing disabled people who have been discriminated against. What you don't want is just to win the complaint. What you want is for practice to change the results of it. It's a little consolation for someone to get a bit of paper saying, well done, you succeeded in your complaint, but for things not to be changed going forward. So what we need is where a complaint is a reasonable adjustment hasn't been made for a disabled Labour member, we need to know as part of the feedback that reasonable adjustments are being put in place going forward. So not only that disabled Labour member, but other disabled Labour members won't face that barrier going forward.
Yeah, and we've come across some issues, for instance, which we involve safeguarding.
Yes.
We had one of our members who was actually assaulted, or alleged assault at party conference in Liverpool, not last year, but the year before, and that matter still has not been dealt with.
That's outrageous, and I'd be interested to hear further details of that, whether or not I'm elected as deputy leader. We need to get to the bottom of that. And so you're saying that it was a conference the year before last?
Yeah.
Yes.
And it still hasn't been resolved?
No.
And presumably, when it's a question of assault, I mean, it's incredibly serious. So
yeah.
I mean, people who make complaints or people who are subject to complaints, in my view, need to be fully informed throughout the process, because either making a complaint or being subject to a complaint can be very stressful. So we shouldn't be leaving people in the dark, should we?
No, and I think that not knowing is the biggest thing that seems to impact, especially those people if they happen to be neurodiverse anyway, because if you have somebody who's on the autistic spectrum, and being the fact that they're neurodiverse, they expect things to happen. If there's a procedure that is supposed to go step by step by step by step, that's what they expect. If it says that, instead of saying ambiguously that your complaint will be dealt with in a timely manner, that's leaving it, how long is a piece of string?
Exactly.
That is very difficult for those people who will look at a procedure and say, but it should have a time aspect, because all they do is worry about it.
Of course, and the other thing is, obviously sometimes investigations where you're gathering lots of evidence might take longer than initially expected. However, people should be updated. So if someone gets a letter, maybe every month or whatever, saying this is where we're at with your complaint, we need a bit more information, but we're carrying on, and people at least know something's happening. And basically, if you don't hear, you think you don't matter. You think you're being treated as if you don't matter. So if you're not updated, it feels like no one cares. And that's the worst position to be in. So people deserve the dignity of being kept informed, whether they're the complainant or whether the person about whom a complaint is being made. Because, of course, in the silence from not being updated, all sorts of worries enter people's minds, as you suggest, disproportionately, so in relation to some disabled members with non-visible disabilities that you're referring to.
Okay, well, that concludes our questions for the day. Thank you very, very much for your time.
No, thank you.
Have you got any particular questions you wanted to ask us?
I was going to be cheeky and say, where can I get a copy, a print of that Lemmy picture?
I can hook you up. I'll contact my brother later.
Oh, that'd be amazing. That'd be amazing.
It's he did some prints, so I'll make sure I find out, and I'll get you the family rate.
Lovely. It'll take pride of place at my house in Leeds. So I've got a picture of me and Jeremy holding up a Leeds United shirt. He wasn't too happy about that. We'll put the Lemmy picture next to it. But in terms of a serious question to finish off, I just wanted really to ask you if there was one thing that you could change about how the Labour Party deals with or treats disabled Labour members. What would it be? Obviously, there's more than one thing. What's the top priority, do you think?
I think
change.
Do we each get one?
We each get one.
We're going to choose fairly similar ones. My one is certainly getting that disabled person or disabled person's rep on the NEC, and getting the disabled members conference. I would like to see disabled people as advisors to shadow cabinet and cabinet ministers, so that they actually understand their job from the perspective of somebody who is disabled. That's
really important. The first two things you came up with, I was aware of and I support, and if I'm deputy leader, I will push for those. The third idea you came up with, I have to say I'd never thought of that. I think that's a really good idea.
Okay, so my cheeky little ask, I'm a local Labour county councillor in Suffolk, and unfortunately we lost Sandy as our representative. But besides that, being very blue area, one of the things I experienced as a councillor dealing with people's mental health is that I was put in a very awkward position in a meeting where somebody experienced a mental health crisis in a public meeting, and nobody knew what to do with it, despite the fact the only people who knew what to do with it would have been the police, who would have put that person in protective custody because it had gotten almost to that point. And I vowed as a Labour councillor to make sure that I found some kind of training mechanism in order that every councillor and every MP would be trained as a mental health first aider, or at least a champion. And I wondered if you would work with us. And the cheeky bit of this is that Fran and I are both instructors in mental health first aid. so we could instruct and offer services. And this is not a quid pro quo thing. I'm not doing that. But would you help work with us, whether you're deputy leader or not, to try to get our representatives support for dealing with people, especially in the next 5 years, if we can't make a change to support us getting the tools to our representatives?
I think that's very important. That's very important indeed. And we've had some training on different issues. For example, in the Shadow Cabinet, I remember they brought some people in to make us aware about how dementia and Alzheimer's affects people and how we should respond to that. And a lot of us learned a lot from that. So I think we should have different training in for Labour representatives. And I think what you suggest sounds fantastic and very important.
And we're willing to talk with you after the effect, you know, to whatever happens.
That'd be great.
One way or t'other.
Whether I'm not elected, whether or not I'm elected as deputy leader, let's carry on this conversation and let's work together on sorting some of these things out. Is that okay?
Yep, absolutely.
Richard,
And
thank you very much for your time in
my
this.
pleasure. I've got to rush and vote now, unfortunately.
Yeah, okay.
yep, no problem. Take care, and I'll be in touch about Lemmy.
Lovely. Take care then.
Okay.
Okay,
Bye.
Bye. See you later.
Bye.
Cheers.